The midnight silence inside Hamilton Tower carried the strange weight of a cathedral, solemn, vast, and watchful. The marble floors gleamed under strips of fluorescent light, reflecting the tired movements of a lone janitor pushing his mop bucket down the atrium. John Miller's worn shoes whispered across the tile, and in that moment, he looked like every other invisible man who made a living cleaning up the messes of the powerful. His daughter's drawing a crayon sketch of a smiling dinosaur peeked out from the pocket of his uniform, grounding him in a world far away from glass towers and cold corporate power. But the night had other plans. The revolving doors slid open without warning, and 4 men slipped into the lobby like shadows with intent. Their eyes carried hunger, their steps carried violence. Above them, in the glowing office of the 23rd floor, CEO Sarah Hamilton worked late, oblivious to the danger stalking her. John tightened his grip on the mop handle. His reflection stared back at him in the bucket's water, but it wasn't the face of a janitor. It was the face of a man who had once been someone else, someone trained to end nights like this. And tonight, the mop would not just clean, it would fight. John Miller was 35 years old, but his eyes often looked older. Too many nights on duty had carved faint lines at their corners, and grief had deepened them long before the janitor's uniform ever touched his shoulders. He was a single father, a widower, a man who lived for one reason alone, his daughter, Emily. Every evening, he kissed her goodnight in their small apartment, promising he'd be back before breakfast. She was 8 years old, full of questions about cats, dinosaurs, and whether the stars could hear her wishes. John answered each one, like it mattered more than the last. Then, when she drifted to sleep, he put on the faded Navy uniform of Clean Wave Services and headed downtown to scrub, polish, and disappear inside a skyscraper of glass and steel. Hamilton Tower was the kind of building that pretended it never slept. Even at midnight, screens glowed in the offices of junior associates too desperate to go home, and the security desk hummed with cameras watching every corner. But John knew the truth. Every building had blind spots. Every fortress had doors that opened to the right hands or the wrong ones. To most people, John was invisible. Executives walked past him without a nod. Assistants never met his eyes. Even security guards barely grunted when he swiped his badge. That was fine with him. The less attention he drew, the better. His life was supposed to be small now, quiet, safe. But quiet was deceptive. Quiet could snap in half with the sound of a single door opening. It happened at 12:03 a.m. The revolving doors of the atrium spun, though no one should have entered at that hour. The guards at the front desk were gone, probably on their cigarette break. John looked up from his mop. 4 men stepped inside. They moved like they belonged, but their suits didn't fit the building. Too generic, too clean. They weren't there to negotiate. They were hunters. John's instincts stirred like a muscle long left unused. He felt their intent before he saw their weapons bulging beneath jackets. Their eyes swept the lobby with professional sharpness. One glanced at the elevator bank, another at the stairwell. Their target was clear, and she was still working. Sarah Hamilton, 28, sharp, ruthless in boardrooms, her reputation carved out of steel, was known for burning midnight oil. John had seen her silhouette through her office windows more nights than he could count. Tonight she was there again, unaware that predators had slipped into her world. The 4 men fanned out. One walked the perimeter, pretending to check his phone. Another disappeared through the stairwell door. The other 2 pressed toward the executive elevators. John's mop slid across the marble, in another slow arc, but his heart had already shifted gears. He had promised himself never to go back, never to be that man again. But fatherhood had taught him something sharper than war ever had. If danger came close to his child's world, to the fragile future he was building for her, he couldn't look away. And if these men succeeded in their mission tonight, the city's quiet would shatter. He leaned the mop against the bucket. Water rippled once, reflecting the faces of the intruders. John's fingers closed around the wooden handle. It wasn't steel, it wasn't forged for battle. But it was solid, straight, and in his hands, it would be enough. The janitor straightened, shoulders squared, gaze steady. Invisible men didn't fight. But John Miller wasn't just a janitor. The first man didn't see the mop move. He felt the absence of space where his hand expected it to be. He'd cut diagonally across the marble with a confidence bred by soft landings jobs where people obeyed and doors opened. He reached to shove the janitor aside, and John's mop handle slid along the man's wrist like a bar sliding into a latch. The twist was small, almost polite. The outcome wasn't. Nerves fired, fingers opened, and the phone clattered across the floor in a spin of glass and light. The man winced and stepped in to correct what should have been a minor embarrassment. John stepped out, guiding him past with a brush of wood at his elbow that rewrote balance. The man's knee met marble in a way that convinced it to stay. He drew a breath to shout a mistake. The mop's rubber end touched his throat, the kind of pressure that turned vowels into memory. His eyes watered. John eased him backward behind the central column and laid him down like a heavy length of rope, as if he were another tool that would be needed later. No one noticed. That was the trick of atriums built for spectacle. They swallowed detail. The second man shouldered into view through the stairwell door. Taller, thicker, less manners. He wore his suit like a tarp stretched over a truck. His jacket flared when he moved an unintentional semaphore, revealing weight in the crook of his arm. He saw the janitor and saw a problem shaped like a witness. He reached across his chest. John didn't raise his voice. He lifted the mop a few inches and let the handle point at the man's wrist, a quiet line of geometry. "Don't," he said. The man sneered and pulled. The gun cleared leather and never cleared gravity. The mop arced from above and kissed the back of his hand with a crack that vibrated the bones forward into open, astonished fingers. Metal clanged against marble and skittered under a bench. The second man pivoted, letting anger do most of the work. John spun the mop like a slow propeller and waited. When the man committed his weight, John stepped aside and brought the mop down at an oblique angle across the ligaments above the knee. Knees are honest. They buckle when asked in the right language. He dropped hard and reached instinctively for the joint. The mop's rubber tip found sternum and held him there with enough pressure to announce a treaty. Above them, the executive elevators hummed. The doors parted on 23 with a hush, and Sarah Hamilton stepped into a mirror. She almost missed the detail that mattered. The tiny red diode on the hallway camera wasn't blinking. She paused, key fob warm against her palm, and listened to a silence that felt curated. Her instincts, which had been trained to smell market risk a fiscal quarter ahead, tasted something metallic in the air. She turned for the private elevator, telling herself she was being dramatic. The elevator arrived already occupied. A man smiled with just his teeth. "Evening, Miss Hamilton." Her thumb pressed the emergency stop before he finished the word Hamilton. The car thudded into stillness. He glanced at the red button, then at her. "Safety check?" he asked. "Don't worry," she said. "I never do." Downstairs, the third man peeled off for the executive elevators. He swiped a badge that wasn't his, let the doors sigh, and vanished upward. The fourth man took the long way around the atrium, a slow, careful orbit that gave him time to stock inventory. One janitor, one bucket, one central column, no guard in sight. He didn't see the first man sleeping wrong against stone until he was close enough to hear the drag in his breath. The fourth man's right hand started its journey toward a jacket. John met it with the mop handle and pressed down in a gesture that looked almost affectionate. Hands have hierarchies. The wrist listens to what a straight length of wood says when it speaks in leverage. The man sank to a knee, swore under his breath, and tried to twist out. John's foot slid forward a bare inch, a tripwire motion that removed options. The marble welcomed him with a sound that carried. The bucket's water steadied. John's grip shifted. Somewhere far above, a muffled thud rattled the elevator shaft. The private elevator had stopped between floors. John looked up and saw the red LED frozen between 22 and 23. He didn't think. He moved. The service corridor tasted of dust and old coffee. He keyed the maintenance panel, pulled the shaft door, and climbed into a darkness that rang with the elevator's soft complaints. The mop handle wouldn't fit the way a pry bar would, but Ashwood has a talent for pretending. He slid it between the elevator doors and leaned until the gap was a question. Fingers followed, then shoulders. The car's light made a pale box in the dark. Inside, the man with the tooth-only smile had one hand on Sarah's wrist and the other on the emergency phone, as if it would decide in his favor. He turned when the door yawned. "Maintenance," John said, and dropped. The space made rules, short swings, no wind-up, use the car's edges. The man moved quickly, the kind of quick that comes with practice, and a ledger of past wins. He fed a telescoping baton out of his sleeve with a practiced flick and cut a line through the air at John's ribs. John's mop met it in a dry, wooden clack that sounded like a metronome. The baton's tip glanced off and rapped the car wall, sparking in the mirror. John let the rebound carry the mop's butt end into the man's forearm, scraping along the radius until metal kissed bone. He hissed, shifted his grip, and tried for Sarah's throat with his free hand. Sarah didn't freeze. She rotated her captured wrist, the way a good instructor teaches thumb through the gap, circle to the outside, don't pull, peel. The hand slipped. She stepped sideways, taking herself out of the line of strikes and into the corner where mirrors multiply bad options. Button, John said without looking. She hit the emergency stop again, because people like to do the only thing that has already done something. The elevator juddered. The baton swung. John's mop moved like a lever finding purchase. The baton flew, pinwheeling into the corner. The man wasn't done. He reached for the bulge under his arm, the last argument. John didn't let him finish the sentence. The mop's rubber head thunked into his solar plexus with that old definitive sound, the one that says lungs are overrated. He folded. John guided him down with the same care he had given the first man in the atrium, and propped him in the corner. Eyes open, lights dimmed. Sarah's hands were steady, but her breath wasn't. She looked at John in the hard, clean light of the car and cataloged what didn't fit. The stance, the economy, the microscopic smiles skill makes when it recognizes itself. "Who are you?" she asked. "Maintenance," he said again, and for some reason she wanted to laugh. The doors opened to the lobby on a sigh that sounded like relief and excuses. Men were arranged artlessly in small tragedies against expensive stone. Somewhere a guard walked back in smelling of smoke and bad timing. The janitor pushed the mop bucket out of the car like a person leaving a chapel. Sarah stepped beside him and saw her building slumped into the shapes people leave when muscle memory collides with marble. Security finally flooded the space. Radios burped jargon. Someone asked a question with too many words. Sarah answered with fewer, voice flat and precise. "Handle it quietly." She didn't say please. John had already started to go, steering for the service corridor with the kind of silence that makes an argument only to itself. "Wait," Sarah said, surprised at her own voice. He paused. Not turned. Paused. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he said, and disappeared into the fluorescent hush of back of house. By morning, Hamilton Tower had swapped night's mess for its daytime costume. The marble was sanctimoniously clean. HR had sent a tasteful email about evaluating security enhancements. The rumor mill had become a hydroelectric plant, powering at least 3 floors. Sarah's office looked out over a city that insisted on being newer than yesterday. She let the view sit, then turned to her screen and pulled up vendor logs. Cleanwave, night crew, contractor IDs. She found the line she wanted. 019, shaft access, J. Miller. Not a ghost, then. A name. The HR file told her nothing beyond what it needed to. Temporary contract, background check, clear, references, minimal, supervisor notes, punctual, quiet, efficient. She called the Cleanwave manager and received an apologetic nothing for her effort. "He's good," the man said, like that answered anything. "Doesn't say much. Folks like him tend to keep schedules, ma'am." "Folks like him?" she asked. "Single dads," he said. "They get things done." She hung up and sat very still. For years, she had calibrated risk, with models built out of numbers. Numbers had never lied to her. People had. Now, a person had acted with the precision of clean math, and she realized she was more comfortable with what she didn't know than what she did. By late afternoon, she was back in the atrium, shoes tapping a private tempo across marble that had already forgotten how hard heads are. Staff drifted past on their way to trains and Ubers, each carrying a version of the story shrunk to fit their lives. She walked straight to the service corridor and found a door propped with a folded cardboard wedge. The janitor's closet smelled like lemon solvent and the stubborn optimism of cheap coffee. John stood at a steel table, refilling spray bottles with a measured hand that made the job look ceremonial. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked like he'd already accounted for the possibility. "Miss Hamilton," he said. "I have a note," she replied. He waited. She folded it once, then didn't hand it to him. "There will be more," she said instead. "You know that, don't you?" "Yes." "How?" Because the kind of men who came last night don't accept sunk costs, he said. They double down. On what? On errors, he said, and appetites. She leaned against the door frame, breaking a rule she would have enforced yesterday. What do they want? Something you won't sell, he said, as if stating a chemical property. Work for me, she said, the words skipping the cue. I do, he said. As more than a janitor. He looked at the label gun in his hand, then at her. I have a daughter. She needs a father who comes home with all his pieces in the right places. I can pay you more than CleanWave, she said. That solves rent, he said. It doesn't solve risk. I can protect you. That solves nothing, he said, and the gentleness in his tone irritated her more than a sneer would have. She straightened. You understand leverage, so do I. If you won't take money, and you won't take protection, what do you take? Time, he said. The kind I can spend eating bananas cut into coins because that's how she likes them. Silence settled, not unfriendly, just thick. She broke it first. Who trained you? She asked. He didn't smile, exactly. He made a face that meant he'd appreciated the question, but wasn't taking it home. An old man with opinions, he said. Military? She pressed. Sometimes language isn't the point, he said. Sometimes it's the listening. She hated that answer for how much it said. Will you help me if they come back? She asked. If I'm here, he said. Yes. And if you're not? Don't ride the private elevator, he said. Use the stairs in the North Core. The cameras there still blink for real. You inspected my building? She asked, unable to stop the edge. I learned its personality, he said. Buildings are like people. They hide what they're ashamed of. She thought of seventh-floor shareholders and smiled without humor. Then maybe we deserve each other. Maybe, he said. She left with the feeling you get when the conversation continues after the door closes. They were smarter the second night. Not louder, smarter. 2 to test and draw. 2 to cut off exits. A 5th man to stand at the control room and turn off the pieces of the building that had offended their methodology. The guard at the desk was present this time, and that made almost no difference. Men who plan for resistance flatten it into a variable with a coefficient called timing. They chose the conference level. Glass was a truth serum, and they wanted to be seen. Sarah stood at the far end of the table because it put her back to a wall and her face to her enemy. She'd learned that at 15 when a debate coach taught her where to plant anger so it grew into authority. The first man set his hat on the table with a neighborly gesture that made the second man's smirk unnecessary. Miss Hamilton, the hatless man said, voice curved into something that pretended to be reasonable. We're here to talk. Your invitations are unconventional, she said. You're hard to reach, he said. You're not, she said, and let the word sit. They took the chairs like they owned equity. The second man's hand hovered near his belt habit, comfort, both. The room's carpet drank the sound of their movements and made the air feel crowded. Outside the glass, the city was a smear of light. Inside, the reflections turned them into a small crowd. The door sighed open. John didn't step in. He slid in sideways, bucket first, as if apologizing to the room for the intrusion. The mop lifted, made a neat round curve, and popped the hat into the air with the goofiest possible flourish. The second man laughed reflex, derision, who knew? His throat tilted open. The mop's rubber end arrived like an answer. The first man came up from his chair efficiently, not fast. He had a hand on something leathered. John stepped forward and to the left, the bucket's wheels squealing a small protest. The room went all angles and short arcs, the kind of fight that turns furniture into punctuation. Sarah moved to the side and let the glass reflect angles she couldn't hold all at once. The mop bounced off table edge, baton, wrist, collarbone, not crushing, nudging, interrupting, choosing. The second man swung low. John stepped high and planted a heel into the chair's back, driving it into the man's shin. Pain wrote a sentence across his face. The first man drew, and found the mop's head already pinning the leather holster to his own ribs. He tried to yank. The angle refused. Don't, John said, and in that single syllable Sarah heard a range he hadn't allowed before. The second man tried again, angry enough to be predictable. The mop's butt end found his temple in a short, efficient jab that put him at half speed. John levered the first man's wrist and took the gun the way a good locksmith takes a tumbler without violence, only inevitability. He ejected the magazine, racked the slide, let the round ping to carpet, and set the parts in the mop bucket, as if he were sorting recyclables. The hatless man was smiling again, not because he was winning, because he admired the work. "You've been bored," he said to John. "I can tell." "Get out," Sarah said. "We'll walk," the man replied, as if that were magnanimous. "But we'll also be back. You've made choices, Miss Hamilton. Men like me exist so people like you have to make fewer." "Men like you exist because people like me fund security," she said. "I'm adjusting the budget." He nodded, pleased. "We've adjusted too," he said, and tipped his chin. The fifth man, the one in the control room, flicked a switch that the building had always trusted. The conference-level lights died for a breath, then coughed back to life. The room flickered into a strobe of almost dark. That was long enough. The second man lunged, the first man reversed, the door sighed, the hallway filled with the slap of retreating shoes. John didn't chase. He listened, counted, judged the distance to exits, and the timeline of police who would arrive just in time to do paperwork. He turned to Sarah. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Are you?" "Not in a way she'll notice," he said, meaning Emily, and that name unspoken landed in the room like a priority stamp. Sarah looked at the mop, at the bucket full of disassembled threat, and felt a complicated gratitude she didn't know how to invoice. "You can't keep doing this as a hobby," she said. He almost smiled. "I don't have hobbies." "What do you have?" "Floors," he said. "And mornings." She held his gaze. "And now you have me," she said. "As a problem or a solution. We can decide that part later." Something like respect passed between them, thin, tensile, unadorned. Outside, the city exhaled. Inside, the mop leaned against the table like a third opinion. Somewhere far away, the fifth man realized he'd stayed too long in a room that kept logs, and he left with the small, neat efficiency of a man quitting a job before he could be fired. Somewhere closer, a little girl in dinosaur pajamas rolled over and reached for a stuffed cat whose stitched face made a permanent, consoling O. John glanced at the clock and felt the old calculus tighten. Time to get home, time to make breakfast, time to pretend that the world could still be kept simple for the length of one bowl of cereal. He picked up the mop, heavy now with the night, and breathed in lemon and glass and the faint iron smell of fear. "Use the north stairs," he told Sarah quietly, "until I fix what's broken." "You're not on the org chart for fixing," she said. "Neither are they," he said, meaning the men who had just left, and then he was gone, flowing into the service corridor like a shadow that preferred fluorescent light. The glass held her reflection a beat longer and gave it back changed. The building knew his name now. And so did she. John walked home through streets that smelled of last night's rain and the first stirrings of morning traffic. The city had begun to stretch and yawn, neon giving way to daylight. His shoes whispered against the pavement, carrying the fatigue of a man who had fought battles without ever signing up for them. He hated walking home like this, heart still pounding with adrenaline, shoulders stiff from restraint, and clothes carrying the faint chemical tang of a fight that hadn't made it into the news. He paused at the corner across from his apartment building, the old brick block that stood wedged between a coffee shop and a tailor. He scanned the windows out of habit. One was lit, Emily's. The curtains fluttered like a small flag against the glass. Safe, still safe. Upstairs, Emily was already awake, waiting at the door in her dinosaur pajamas, eyes wide with sleep but full of anticipation. She clutched her stuffed cat to her chest as though it had been standing guard in his absence. When John unlocked the door, she ran forward and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You're late," she accused with the seriousness only children could manage. John knelt, pressing a kiss into her tangled hair. "Traffic," he said simply. "In the middle of the night?" she asked, tilting her head. He smiled faintly. "Some kinds of traffic never sleep." She didn't understand, and he was grateful. Breakfast was ritual. Eggs sizzling in the pan. Emily perched on the stool with her chin in her hands, narrating her dreams about cats becoming astronauts. John nodded in all the right places, half listening, half replaying the night. He could still see Sarah Hamilton's eyes cold, sharp, searching for truth she wasn't supposed to find. She was too smart, too persistent. And if she kept digging, she'd discover more than just a janitor with a knack for breaking bones. The phone buzzed against the counter. A blocked number. He stared at it until it stopped. "Who was that?" Emily asked. "Wrong number," he lied. But he knew better. At the same time, Sarah sat in her glass office, the city sprawling beneath her like a chessboard. Her phone vibrated with messages from board members demanding explanations, lawyers advising silence, and the PR team drafting statements no one would ever read. She dismissed them all. Her focus was singular. John Miller. She had already run his file through every channel available. The background check was too clean, too normal. People who lived lives like his widowers, single fathers, night shift janitors always had scars, debts, messy paper trails. His didn't. That absence was the loudest signal of all. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. He had fought like a soldier. No, not just a soldier, like someone trained to finish fights quickly, quietly, with tools at hand. That wasn't security training. That was special operations. And men like that didn't just end up mopping floors. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a direct call from her security chief. She almost ignored it, then answered. "Miss Hamilton, we ran another sweep of last night's incident. The men who broke in? Ghosts. No IDs, no priors, no clean links. Whoever sent them doesn't want to be known." Sarah tapped her desk. "And the janitor?" A pause. "Background says civilian, but if you want my opinion..." "I do. He's hiding. In plain sight. And if he hadn't been here last night, you wouldn't be speaking to me right now." Sarah ended the call without reply. She turned in her chair and looked out at the skyline. Somewhere in this city, John Miller was making breakfast for his daughter, pretending to be ordinary. She hated mysteries. But this one made her feel something she hadn't felt in years: fear. Later that day, John sat on a park bench near Emily's school. She chased other children across the playground, laughter bright in the autumn air. He sipped stale coffee, eyes never leaving her. The sunlight should have been comforting. Instead, it painted the shadows sharper. A man sat down beside him without asking. Gray coat, gray hair, eyes that had seen too much. John didn't turn. "You're hard to find," the man said. "Not hard enough, apparently," John replied. The man chuckled. "Still the same. Always 2 exits planned, always watching the glass for reflections." John finally looked at him. "Why are you here, Mason?" "Because you broke cover," Mason said. "And when John Miller breaks cover, the people who built his legend notice." John's grip tightened around the coffee cup. "I'm not him anymore. Tell that to the 4 men in the lobby, or the 2 in the conference room, or the 1 in the elevator." Mason's smile was thin. "You didn't just fight them, John. You sent a message. And trust me, the people on the other side know how to read it." John's jaw flexed. "I won out. I had out." Mason shook his head. "You don't get out. You just get..." Pauses. "And yours is over." They sat in silence, watching Emily climb to the top of the jungle gym and wave down at her father. John forced himself to wave back, to smile. His heart wasn't in it. Mason's voice softened. "You can't hide forever. And if you don't choose your ground, someone else will choose it for you." John didn't answer, but he knew Mason was right. The war he had walked away from was knocking again, and this time, it was at his daughter's door. The phone call came at 7:41 p.m., just as the city's light turned the color of cooling steel. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was small, a bird in a storm. "A man is waiting by the school gate. He says he's a friend of yours. He knows my name." John's world narrowed to a single point. "Do not move," he said, his voice thinner than a knife. "You remember our game?" "Statues and shadows," she whispered. "Good. Be a statue. Then move like a shadow. Through Miss Perez's office. Out the back. I'm 2 minutes away." He was already running, the phone jammed to his ear, the city blurring, his body remembering distances and timings no one had taught him with words. At the corner, a car rolled past too slowly. Windows tinted the color of secrets. John saw the man by the school gate without looking straight at him. Average height, average face, the kind of man you forget on purpose, the kind that doesn't forget you. Emily slipped from the side door, a small comet with a backpack. The man pivoted, then hesitated, because hesitation lives in people who underestimate 8-year-olds, coached by a man who treated the world like a room with multiple exits. John cut across the playground, vaulting a low fence, the mop he'd carried home from Hamilton Tower masquerading as a walking stick. The man saw him now. He smiled as if to make the moment friendly. John preferred the honest look he gave a heartbeat later, when the mop handle kissed his knuckles, and the friend's fingers stopped being good fingers. The gun never cleared his waistband. The bench beside the swings accepted him with a groan. Emily ran into John's legs. He folded around her like a closing book, and held for one blink too long. "It's okay," he murmured into her hair. "You did perfect." "Statues, then shadows," she said into his shirt. He looked up. 2 blocks away, a gray sedan idled and rolled on, already making a report that contained the word child. John memorized its smudged license plate, then deliberately let the memory go. The plate would be wrong. What mattered was the pattern. The pattern said, "This isn't about Sarah anymore. It's about leverage. It's about me." He texted the only person who had permission to move his plans. "They touched the edge of my world," he wrote. Sarah responded in less than a minute. "Then we stopped letting them choose the ground." Hamilton Tower was all glass and muscle when it wanted to be. That night, Sarah set it to both. She closed 3 floors, for maintenance, sent half the security team home, invited the other half to a briefing that didn't exist, and routed the conference-level feeds to a closed loop that told anyone watching exactly what she wanted them to believe: that she was alone, late, predictable, and stubbornly unwilling to learn. "You're baiting them," John said, standing in the soft hum of her office as the city's night pressed its face to the glass. "I'm inviting them to a meeting with the truth," she said. He nodded once. Truth had a way of bringing knives. He spread the building schematics across her table and marked them not with a pen but with small, square post-its that meant things more precise than pen lines could say. He marked camera blind spots, sound leaks, the odd echo at the southeast stairwell landing that could be used like a periscope. He marked a service crawl space above the conference level and a maintenance hatch behind the LED wall in the boardroom. He marked the sub-basement where the building's guts pumped HVAC, backup power, the rack room where light became language. "Why there?" Sarah asked, pointing at the sub-basement note. "Because the man who calls himself Fifth Man will need a handle," John said. "He likes levers, control room or rack room. If I were him, I'd split the difference and bring a portable environment. That makes the rack room the heart." "And the head?" He tapped the boardroom, where he can look at himself in the glass. The plan they built wasn't beautiful. Beautiful plans break at their hinges. This one was elastic. Sarah would sit in the boardroom with a tablet open to numbers that mattered: a pipeline, a vendor matrix, the skeleton of a decision she had refused to make. She would speak to an empty room, because empty rooms listen. She would let the building whisper alone. John would be everywhere else. He ran cable where no one ever looked, taped sensors under the lips of tables, placed a bucket in the sub-basement like a farmer leaving a pail beneath a maple. He swapped the mop handle for another, identical to anyone who didn't look, but heavier. The ash wood hit a steel core he had epoxied into place on a night he'd planned to stop pretending. He tested the balance in his palm and felt the past click into the present like the bolt of a well-kept door. "You've done this before," Sarah said quietly. "Something like it," he said. "The truth you promised me," she said. "I'm asking again." He didn't look at her. "Later." "You don't get to say later," she said, and hated how it sounded, like a woman whose control had been pried up to show the screws. He answered the way men answer when they can't offer comfort, but honesty. "If you knew before we started, your face would tell them when they arrive." "What would it tell them?" "That you recognized one of them," he said. "Who?" He set down the mop and finally met her eyes. "The one who financed your father's riskiest deal." Something cracked inside her chest. It didn't hurt. It made a clean sound, like ice splitting on a lake you thought was solid. "Victor Cade," she said. "Victor Cade," he agreed. She turned to the glass, and the city did not blink for her. "He's my godfather. He's the head. And you?" She stopped. "Who are you that you know this?" He looked at the map of the building between them, at the ductwork and the notes and the small square post-its that meant living or not living. He looked at his hands, at the tendons that had moved too fast last night and the night before. He looked at Sarah until he could tell the truth without asking her to carry its weight. "My name before this one was Gideon Ward," he said. "Your father hired me to keep the worst of the world off your porch, off book, unfriendly to paper. When I got too good at telling Victor no, he tried to erase me. He missed. My wife didn't. For a moment the room was large enough to contain only a single memory. A car door that should have opened into a Tuesday, the crust of road salt on the fender, a ring of scorched air where a life had been. Sarah sat down because hate arrives on a vertical, and the body can't carry it standing. The name Gideon Ward skittered through a dozen old conversations with her father, through stories told sideways with a drink in his hand and a softness in his voice he reserved for things he respected. The ghost from those stories was standing in her office with a mop. She didn't cry. She froze. The kind of freeze that is not fear but recognition. The kind that puts new labels on old rooms. "Why a janitor?" she asked, voice quiet as a year. "Because I wanted to be near the place the bullets would head eventually," he said, "and because mops don't look like weapons." She laughed once, the sound an accidental tear. "Not to them." "Not to them," he said. She stood. The freeze thawed into something sharper. "Let's end this." They came at 11:18 p.m., wearing anonymity like a uniform. Two rode the freight elevator to the sub-basement with tool cases that were not tools. Two took the service stairs and the west corridor, limping the cameras with a pulse of noise that looked like bad luck. Kate arrived last and alone, carrying a briefcase old enough to remember how to threaten a room without needing a password. He let himself into the boardroom with a card that shouldn't open it. Sarah was waiting with the tablet, her posture communicating contempt for interruptions, her eyes communicating nothing. "Sarah," he said, warm with habit, as if he were there to drop off a pie. "Victor," she said, flat as a ledger. He took the head of the table with a host's ease. "You've got enemies." "I'm looking at one," she said. He tilted his head, disappointed. "I taught your father to play strong hands softly. You never liked that part." "I didn't like the part where his friends laundered threat as advice." He smiled, hurt but not. "Sell the unit," he said simply. "The offer won't be this generous again." "The unit that controls half the data pipes through which the city talks to itself?" she asked. "The one you've wanted me to unload since the day I took the chair?" He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thin folder, and slid it across the table. "It's a liability. You know it. I know it. Your shareholders will learn it. I'm trying to help." She didn't touch the folder. "You sent men to beat the word help into the glass." He sighed. "Outsourced idiots to remind you that outcomes are inevitable. You surprised me. Twice. Third time's the charm," she said. He smiled again, his least attractive expression. "There won't be a third time. You're going to sign." "And if I don't?" "Then your janitor stops being interesting, and your little world starts being very, very complicated." In the sub-basement, the fifth man cracked the rack room and plugged a short snake of cable into a port that believed in friendship. The screen on his portable whispered the building's internal organs to him. He hummed, happy. He did not see the small sensor under the lip of the rack. He did not hear the bucket tip. A clear liquid slicked the floor in a lopsided crescent. It did not smell like anything at first. Then the faintest citrus raised a question in his nose. He stepped back on instinct, and his heel met nothing. He dropped. The world bounced. He tried to roll, and found the ground very interested in keeping him where he was. The bucket clanged. Somewhere in the ducts, a fan hiccuped, trying to die. John stepped out of the shadow between the racks, mop in hand, and the fifth man who had invented cleverness twice that month understood with a professional sadness that he had been out-clevered. "What is that?" he asked, gesturing at the slick. "Diluted floor finish," John said. "A little dish soap for the foam. Makes everything honest." The fifth man pulled a knife he'd kept close precisely for this, the moment when an environment betrayed him. The knife stayed in his hand until the mop handle interrupted his wrist with the sternness of a disappointed parent. He let it go. John guided him into the corner and let gravity get promoted. On the corridor cameras, two men in suits moved in a pattern that said, suppression. The first reached the boardroom door and put his ear to it like a shameful habit. The second covered a line of sight that didn't exist. John padded behind them on shoes that remembered quiet. He let the mop head ghost the first man's calf, just enough to whisper betrayal to his balance. As the body searched for the floor, the mop's butt found the second man's ear with a small, tidy sound that felt mean despite its efficiency. They arranged themselves on the rug and offered nothing to the evening except breath. In the boardroom, Victor and Sarah regarded each other like opposing bookends, holding up a history neither wanted to read. "You're going to sign," he said again, softer now, "because I know the name you were never supposed to hear, because I know Gideon Ward didn't die, because I can put his old life back on him like a collar." Sarah didn't look at the glass. She didn't need to. Her face had already told the truth once tonight, privately, and she wasn't going to give Victor the courtesy of surprise. "You killed his wife," she said. "I moved a problem," he said almost kindly, "and in doing so gave you an asset you didn't deserve. I think in terms of systems, Sarah. You think in terms of people. That's why you lose." He reached into the briefcase again and withdrew a pen, clicked it, and set it on the folder with a sound that filled the room like a verdict. "Last offer," he said. The boardroom lights flickered once. Not a cut, a blink. The audio on the room's mic punched out and resumed, the way a heartbeat stutters when a runner crests a hill. Sarah placed her hands on the table. "No," she said. Victor's sigh was a breath longer than a sigh. "Then I'll have to find other ways to make you agreeable." The door opened. John walked in, mop like a staff, calm as the end of prayer. Victor studied him with the curiosity of a collector finding a misfiled rarity. "Gideon," he said, savoring the old name. "I was beginning to think ghosts were camera-shy." John looked at him the way a man looks at a wasp. He has decided to guide out a window instead of crush. "Leave," he said. Victor chuckled. "After all I've invested? In this building? In this family?" He tipped his head toward Sarah. "In you?" "You invested in extraction," John said. "You bought the idea that everything leaves when you tell it to. I don't." "Then we finish it," Victor said, and his hand moved in that small, decisive way hands move when they have given up pretending to be civil. The pen in his fingers wasn't a pen. Sarah didn't scream. She moved not away, but sideways, buying a line, the kind she'd always bought in rooms where words were knives. John stepped into the first meter of space, the most dangerous one, the one between intent and outcome. The mop's head smacked the pen with a sound like a cork in the wrong bottle. Metal disassembled itself on the conference table. The mop's shaft rose, rotated, and fell like a clock hand completing a thought. Victor's wrist learned humility. He reached with his left and learned it too. The world steadied. He did not. "Do you know why we used to fight with sticks in training?" John asked, his voice conversational in a way that made the room shiver. "Because you were poor," Victor hissed. "Because sticks teach you where the angles live," John said, and let the mop show him. It ended without ceremony, which is how things end when the man who wanted spectacle is denied it. Victor found the floor. John removed possibilities from his hands. Sarah called 2 numbers, one that brought uniforms who would follow instructions, and one that reached a prosecutor who owed her father a favor and despised Victor enough to remember the dead in public. When the police asked for statements, Sarah gave them nouns and verbs and no adjectives. When they asked who the janitor was, she said, "My employee," and pointed at the mop like a company credit card. They took Victor away with the disappointed fuss of men who prefer paperwork to history. The 5th man rode an elevator under his own steam and a new limp. The other 2 woke up angry and under arrest. The building exhaled. Somewhere deep in its body, a fan started spinning with the relief of machines that prefer correctness. Sarah stood in the door of the boardroom and looked at John. The word thank you wasn't large enough to carry the thing it was being asked to carry. "Now," she said, voice low, "tell me if you're leaving." He looked past her at the glass, at the city that had almost convinced him to be small, at the table where a man he should have killed was going to live long enough to sit in a courtroom. He looked at the mop in his hand and the ring of lemon polish around its head. "I don't get to keep both lives," he said. "Not the way they were." "What do you keep?" He thought of Emily's dinosaur pajamas, of bananas cut into coins, of the quiet in a kitchen when the day hasn't started being difficult, of a tower that would never be invisible to him again. "I keep mornings," he said, "and I keep showing up when the night thinks it owns the room." She nodded, because that was an answer that didn't ask her to argue. "Consult for me," she said. "Not security, not on the org chart, just be where I'm not looking yet." He almost smiled. "That's a job description I can respect." "And the other job?" she asked softly. "The one with a small person for a boss?" "That one pays in drawings," he said. "Very competitive benefits." She looked at him for a long time and decided something without writing it down. "We'll keep your secret," she said. "It won't stay secret," he said. "But it will stay ours as long as we're careful." They stood in the reflected city, two people who had walked out of other stories into this one. The glass held them like a photograph for a heartbeat longer, and then let them go. The next morning, Emily arranged banana coins in tidy galaxies on her plate. "Do cats have meetings?" she asked. "Important ones," John said. "They're very punctual." She nodded, satisfied. "Did you have a meeting last night?" "I did." "With who?" "A man who forgot how to leave nicely." "Did you remind him?" "I did," he said, and tucked a crayon drawing into his wallet, the dinosaur's smile brighter than any skyline. He looked at Emily. "How do you feel about donuts after school?" She brightened. "With sprinkles?" "With sprinkles," he said. He walked her to the door and paused with his hand on the knob, as if a different door waited on the other side. "Hey, Em?" "Statues and shadows, but also songs." She squinted. "Songs? If you ever can't find me with statues or shadows, you sing the song we made up for rain days. I'll hear it." She nodded, solemn with the responsibility of signal. After she left, he stood in the kitchen and watched the light move across the table, the way it always did at this hour. He thought of mop handles, and old names and men who thought systems could live without people. He thought of a woman who had frozen when she learned the truth, then thawed into something better than fear. He thought of a building that would never be the same because its bones had been seen and judged and forgiven. At Hamilton Tower, the marble shone with an almost comic sincerity. People walked across it not knowing what it had carried. That was fine. The point of a floor is to hold weight without asking for credit. John clocked in. The name on his badge said Miller, and for today, that was the right name. He pushed the bucket into the hum of the atrium. The mop made its small, consoling sound. Somewhere under the sound, if you listened the way he did, you could hear a city recalibrating. Judges, prosecutors, boardrooms that had found their spine. A woman who would not sell what couldn't be priced. A child who believed cats had schedules and fathers who showed up. The elevator bell chimed. The doors opened on a figure framed by glass and light. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Sarah said. "Good morning, Miss Hamilton," he replied. She walked beside him without ceremony, like two people on an ordinary errand. "We'll talk after your shift," she said, "about invisibility budgets." "Sounds expensive," he said. "It is," she said. "Worth it." They passed the central column where memory liked to sit. He tipped the mop head, a quiet salute to a place that had taught him, once again, what he was. Not a ghost, not a legend, not the man he'd been made into by other men's appetites. Just the person who showed up when the room needed someone to. He turned the mop. The water stilled. The day began.